Hello and welcome to this seventh and final presentation on the foundational knowledge of trust law in the UK. In this presentation, it is my aim to cover the ways in which a trust can be varied or terminated, how trust structures hold up globally, the differences between trust recognition in common law systems compared to civil law systems, and we also get into the rights of third parties as an alternative structure to a trust within civil law systems that do not formally recognize trusts within their own legal system. So, without further ado, let's go. We will first start with the variation and termination of a trust. Now, trusts, really, they're designed to last many, many years. They are meticulously designed to cover all of the situations that could possibly arise during this time, and obviously they require lots of thought to get them just right the first time, exactly as the settler wanted everything to be. However, we know that there is something that is certain in this world, and that is change. Changes can come along which may mean that a trust may need to adapt to those changes, or it may need to terminate completely. For example, in situations where a trust was created for a minor beneficiary and that minor beneficiary has now grown up. Well, what now then? What happens now? Well, trust law actually provides for the varying or the termination of a trust in a few different ways, which aims to balance the need for change whilst also respecting the settler's original intentions, but also the beneficiary's rights and also the reality of the trustee's personal situation and things like this. So, in line with changes and the idea that all good things must come to an end, let's now focus on exactly how and when a trust can be brought to an end, also the legal mechanisms for varying a trust, and also the role that courts play in supervising all of these changes. The first way in which a trust can be terminated is by the beneficiary or all of the beneficiaries. In situations where all of the beneficiaries are of legal age, they're sound of mind, and they're also absolutely entitled to the trust property, so in other words, there are no contingent interests, so the right of beneficiaries are not dependent on a certain event happening or not happening, nor are there any unborn beneficiaries that will be affected by the trust, then actually they can demand for the trust property to be passed to them, which will cause the once split title to now merge again, which will have the effect of terminating the trust as the legal and equitable titles have now married up again, so they've become whole once more. This way to terminate a trust is actually supported by case law, the case of Saunders v. Vautier in 1841, where a beneficiary under a will trust became of age and then demanded for the trust property to vest to him. So the court held that because he met the criteria of being sui juris and also being absolutely entitled to the property, he could actually terminate the trust just by demanding for the property to be given to him, and therefore discharging the trustees from their duties. It is key to note here that the rule in Saunders v. Vautier is limited because in certain circumstances it would not apply. This rule will not apply if the beneficiaries are minors, if some or all of the interests are actually contingent on a future event happening or not happening. For example, imagine Lana is supposed to receive trust property only when she turns 30. Then she wouldn't actually be able to terminate the trust at the age of 25 because her interest is contingent on her reaching 30 years of age. Or maybe there are unascertained beneficiaries, so beneficiaries that cannot actually be found, or maybe there are unborn beneficiaries who are to benefit from the trust once they are actually born. Also, it is key to note that if there are multiple beneficiaries, then all of these beneficiaries need to agree collectively. If one does not agree, then the rule will not apply because it requires unanimous consent to terminate the trust. If any of these limits apply to a specific situation, then the trust would only be able to be varied or terminated through a court order. So let's talk about how a court would play a role in all of this stuff. In line with the Variation of Trust Act of 1958, there may be situations where a beneficiary would not be able to give consent to a variation or a termination, maybe because they are a minor or there are unborn beneficiaries' rights that are at stake. Then the court can actually approve a variation on behalf of these beneficiaries. But this is only the case if the variation is going to be for the benefit of the beneficiary, and also that the change will not actually prejudice the rights of other beneficiaries. So this act actually allows for a way to restructure the trust, for example, to accelerate or delay disbursements, or to also be able to amend trustee powers and things like this. There is also an important key note here as well. Because the court has inherent jurisdiction in equity over the trust, it means that in extreme cases, the court can actually vary trusts even outside of the bounds of the Variation of Trust Act. And you may be wondering, how on earth is this possible? Well, if you recall from the equity law presentation, equity imbues the courts with a general discretion to disapply statutory or common law rules whenever good conscience requires it. So, in cases where the conscience of the parties is affected in some way, then the court can automatically vary the trust, even if the statute doesn't have provisions for this, because the judge will now be relying on the inherent general discretion that they have in equity to be able to do this. So when would this be done exactly? This is applicable when the purpose of a trust is no longer possible, or it is actually illegal, or it has been frustrated. So in other words, there has been some unforeseen circumstances that make it impossible for the trust to be carried out practically. But then you also have certain situations where it would actually serve the public interest to have the terms varied, which is especially important in cases of charitable trusts. The next point is termination by fulfillment. So a trust can actually automatically be terminated when the following situations occur. The purpose of the trust has been fulfilled, or the trust period has ended or expired, or all the trust property has actually been disbursed to the beneficiaries and there's just simply nothing left for the trustees to do. Once there is no property left for a trustee to manage, then the trust automatically ends by operation of law, which just means it ends not because anyone took any particular action or that they intended for it to happen this way. It just happens because the law recognizes that this is the outcome that's required in that particular situation. And naturally, if there's no more trust property, there's nothing left for the trustee to do, right? And the last way is by statute. So different statutes may become applicable, which would result in changes to the trust. So for example, a statute may require the modification of a trust due to insolvency or family law issues. Say for example, a beneficiary got divorced. Or it may be the case that a statute automatically adapts the terms of a trust that may otherwise be outdated. For example, the updating of investment powers, which came about naturally in light of the Trustee Act of 2000. So some practical examples just to show you how some of these methods of variation or termination may actually look in real life. The first example is a trust that has been set up for the benefit of 4 grandchildren. However, one has sadly passed away before they were able to receive anything from the trust. In this example, the trust cannot be terminated or unwound without the consent of all the remaining beneficiaries, who must also be sui juris to be able to actually give their consent. The second example is trustees of a trust. They want to update and modernize their investment powers. So in this case, they would be able to rely on the Trustee Act of 2000, which automatically updated these powers. Or, on the other hand, they could actually seek a variation order from a court in line with the Variation of Trusts Act of 1958. Okay, so now let's move on to the recognition of trusts around the world. So the concept of trust is really a key concept in common law systems, which includes England and Wales and a lot of the other former British colonies around the world. There are some countries, though, that do not usually recognize the trust concept, but they may actually have other concepts that may have similar effects to a trust in a common law system. So let's get into trusts across borders, in civil law jurisdictions, how they can be internationally recognized, and also the Hague Trust Convention. As we have gathered throughout all of these presentations, common law countries do recognize that it is possible for ownership to be split into legal and equitable title. However, in civil law systems, and most countries that have a civil law system, they do not recognize that this is actually possible. They don't recognize that it's possible to split ownership in this way. The law views it more like you either own something or you do not. So naturally, you can begin to see how this may bring challenges regarding trusts that are used for estate planning across borders. So if someone has assets in different countries, but also the recognition and therefore enforcement of foreign trust structures. So how a trust may actually hold up in one jurisdiction, but not in another. This means that countries that do have a common law jurisdiction will actually be very trust-friendly. Some examples of these countries include England, Wales, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, United States of America, and even many Caribbean jurisdictions. In these countries, you can be sure that they will recognize express, resulting, and constructive trusts. You can expect fiduciary roles to be enforced, and that there will also be well-developed trust law and case law regarding trusts. On the other hand, you then have civil law jurisdictions, such as France, Germany, and Spain, which do not readily recognize the ability to split ownership into legal and equitable title. Instead, what they do recognize is direct ownership, fiduciary-like obligations, and the rights of third parties to a contract. So let's focus and zoom in onto that third point, the rights of third parties to a contract. So from the book, Equity and Trusts, specifically the 10th edition by Alastair Hudson, this is detailed out very well. So on page 244, it reads, "Arrangements considered to be a trust under English law would frequently be understood in those civil code jurisdictions not as a division in property rights, but rather as contracts for the benefit of third parties." It goes on to say, most non-Anglo-American jurisdictions see property rights as vesting in one person as owner, with other people having merely personal claims in relation to the use of the property. This differs greatly from the English trust, in which trustees and the beneficiaries all have varying forms of proprietary rights against the trust fund itself. So you can see from these quotes that civil law countries, they may not recognize a trust as being possible within their civil law system. However, a great civil law alternative that has the same effect essentially is a contract that contains the rights of third parties within it, meaning that there will be one owner of that property and then other people who will have personal claims to be able to use that property. Then you have some countries that have actually adopted a mixed jurisdiction as such, where they kind of fuse features of both the common law and civil law together, almost like taking the best and leaving the rest. Examples of countries that have adopted mixed jurisdictions include Scotland, which has its own trust laws that actually differ from England, but ultimately they do recognize trusts. Then you have South Africa, where trusts are actually recognized under Roman Dutch law with their own twists and variations. And then you have Mauritius, Malta, Jersey, and Guernsey, who have all adopted trust law and legislation to align better with global standards. So, a way in which the challenges of trusts that span over several jurisdictions have actually been mitigated is by the creation of the Hague Convention on the law applicable to trusts and on their recognition, which was created in 1985. The main takeaways from this convention is that the contracting states will recognize the validity of foreign trusts, even if their own laws wouldn't usually recognize them as being a possible mechanism to own property. You also have that the convention only applies to express trusts which are actually evidenced in writing, and that it also allows for the determination of the governing law of that trust. So you can choose which jurisdiction you want the trust governed under. So, of course, it is important to just note the countries that have actually signed up to this convention. So currently, the contracting states are Australia, Canada, China, Cyprus, France, Italy, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, Malta, Monaco, Netherlands, Panama, San Marino, Switzerland, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the United States of America. This information is very practically necessary because it shows us the importance of thinking thoroughly through the structure of an express trust, which we're looking to create. For example, which governing law will we want to be used in the deed? Where will the trust actually be domiciled? Is there any property that will actually need to be registered in a specific country, which will therefore rely on that specific country's law system where the property is actually physically located? Does the trust need to be disclosed to an authority? And in terms of the administration of the trust, which jurisdiction will be best? Where can you get the most advantages, really? So again, these are all important factors to consider in quite a lot of detail. And obviously, this will be different for everyone depending on the exact property that they have, the actual trust structure that they choose, and all of this kind of stuff. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of situation. So as we draw to the end of this final presentation on trust law, we have covered a bunch of really important topics to help us round off this mini crash course on trusts. We have looked at how trusts can be varied or terminated by the parties to the trust or by a court. We've looked at how the trust structure holds up in a global context. We've looked at the differences between trust recognition in common law systems versus their civil law counterparts. We've also discussed how the rights of third parties in civil law systems has a very similar effect to a trust in a common law system. And we've also looked at the purpose and then the effect of the Hague Trust Convention. This marks the end of this trust law presentation, meaning that you have officially finished getting the foundational, the core, and a little bit more advanced knowledge of trust law in the UK. So well done for completing these presentations, and I really hope that now you have a really solid grasp of trust law and what trusts are all about, and that you can begin to apply this information in your life for your benefit and also for the benefit of others around you as well. Because that is what it's all about, right? Knowledge in action through change in the real world. So remember, you can always return to these videos whenever you need to, and you can watch them as many times as you need to. Watch them on repeat, pause them, take notes, rewind, fast forward, all of it. All that you need for your own development. So if you have any questions regarding the content that we've covered in this series, then please contact the email which can be found in the channel description or in the video description below. You can also join the Telegram group and follow our Instagram for updates and other information on there as well, which can be found in the channel links as well. Thank you for joining me in this Foundations of Law series, and I really look forward to our next encounter.